the salmon farming industry, it's standard, that about 25% of the fish die in the production process, before they reach a size ready for harvest. And if you put that in perspective with just, let's keep talking about cattle, there's a farmer and 1 out of every 4 cows just dies because it has horrible open wounds and all that, like you can imagine what would happen. Like they would be closed down immediately.
Hello and welcome to the Ireland on the Fly podcast about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland. This week we wanted to find out about the Salmon Summit that was held recently in Iceland. It's an annual get-together of NGOs, scientists, policymakers, researchers and scientists run by the North Atlantic Salmon Fund to discuss the current state of salmon stocks and possible solutions to help the future of the fish. So what did they discuss and what of note came out of the summit? We speak to Elvar Fridriksson, NASF's Programme Director in Iceland, to find out more. And Tom, before we hear from Elvar, there were some eye-opening insights he gave us, especially in relation to fish farming in Iceland.
Good man, Dara. Yeah, huge eye-opener to hear Elvar chatting. And kind of a bit surprised because you touched on it during the interview and I hadn't thought of it. I mean, we all look upon Iceland here, the rest of Europe, kind of like with a bit of envy after what they did with their previous crash and what they did to the politicians that were in charge. So you imagine they're very much driven by the people themselves, and they seem to be from talking to them, but it's almost as if it's caught up in them unawares, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. So just, and you'll hear this from Elvar, he gets into it, it's gone from 3,000 tonnes to 45,000 tonnes in the last 5 or 6 years. That's 1,500%.
Yeah, that's what you said.
In half a decade.
And then when he touches on the ratio of headage of farm fish to the wild fish, wow. So, you see the danger there,
Yeah, you would worry. And I think it's interesting he's saying, the people in Iceland are starting to kind of, become aware and kind of go, hold on a sec, what's going on? But you'd wonder, you'd hope it's not too late, the horse hasn't bolted.
Yeah, but it's true. But like the good thing about it as well, and we discuss it in there. I mean, and we've said this before. It's not anti actual farming. It's the practices, and that I know I myself and you always touch on. We want something sustainable. We realize that we do need this to be done. We've got to feed people, and it was very interesting to hear touch on some of the I won't say alternative, but the alternative methods, which are a lot more sustainable on rearing fish.
Yeah, and this was one of the main things, because when I saw the Salmon Summit that was taking place, and was one of the reasons why I wanted to speak to somebody about it, was the fact that they had a panel discussion on the alternatives sustainable fish farming, for want of a better phrase. And that was, and Elvar touched it, because there are these companies out there that are doing this. They're not on a mass commercial scale. And yes, they are a bit more expensive, but it was really interesting to hear the technology does exist. It came down to, I think, was it 2 words we repeated. 1 is the will and 2 is the money.
Money.
And money, yeah.
If the will
was there. Yeah, exactly. If the will was there, it could happen. So I think it's kind of what you feel so frustrated about, and I think maybe when people listen to it as well.
And sometimes if you think about all these things, you just got to. So you got to go and get out fishing. So that's what we say. Let's not forget what we're on about here. So
and have you been out yourself?
Well, yeah, it's gone very tough here. It actually has. We're in that period after the duck fly, and temperatures plummeted. So there's no real fly at the moment. Temperature today was about 6 or 7 degrees. It reached a lofty height of 7 degrees, and didn't stop raining all day. So yeah, no, need a bit of warmth, need a bit of nature to get the next fly hatch on, which is the olives, and later on for the camto. So yeah, it's tough.
And what was the duck fly like for you, Tom? What was the duck fly like?
Very patchy. A couple of nice days, best way of putting it. I think what happened as well is, it's funny, it probably hatched at around the same time as normal. That couple of days after Paddy's Day it starts, and that coincided with storms and part of the period where we had the heaviest rainfall in Ireland ever recorded for March, where the lake here down at my place rose in old money about 2 foot in 10 days.
Wow.
So
Is that as bad as you've seen it, like in terms of
I've never seen it rise
like,
as fast. Never seen it rise as fast. It was just amazing. It really was. So yeah, that killed it. But then it settled off a bit near the end of March, and we did get a couple of nice days, which is great, really good. But look, that's the problem with early season fishing. We've mentioned it here before a couple of times. You know, you want to be prepared. You really do. What about you? Any fishing?
well, I did a bit of mullet on the fly, would you believe? Which was my first time doing it. I'm one of these, right? I'm into all different things. Like when I played sport when I was younger, I played literally about half a dozen different sports, right? I was never one. I could never just focus in on one. Bit of a kind of jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like that with fishing. I'm just fascinated by all different aspects of it. But there's certain species I find, so the more, when I went fishing for the mullet and the fly, it just kind of, I don't know, just awoke something in me that I went, oh, I could get into this.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting tactic. So we were feeding them bread, right? So you're feeding them bread.
Chumming.
Right, it's a bit like coarse fishing. Yeah, you're pre-baiting the swim, like,
right.
So
yeah.
But what you're doing is you're seeing if they're interested in coming up to feed, and when they are, then you go, right, there's the opportunity, and then you throw the fly in amongst them, right? And so, like at one stage, I was pretty much kind of crouched nearly behind a rock, to just try and kind of keep low. And we were feeding them in, and it was a flowing tide coming in. It was about an hour after high tide, so it was flowing in, and you could see them coming in, like, and they were just coming up to the surface. And I didn't catch any. I had missed probably about half a dozen, and my sheer incompetence, it's about getting that timing right. So I was either striking too early, striking too late, but I'm confident now that it's just getting that timing. I remember when I first started nymphing, it was like you'd be missing loads of the time because you're seeing it go down, and you have to. And if you could just get that timing right, at one stage I saw one, and they approach different times. They'll approach it different ways. They'll attack it different ways. They'll very subtle sometimes they'll attack it really aggressively. And he was coming in kind of side on to the fly, which was kind of ideal because I saw it all happening in slow motion. It was just coming up to the surface. I saw the mouth open.
Class.
And then I pulled the fly away. I struck.
Not class.
Not class. I literally.
Oh, no.
Say people on the beach were looking at me going, what the hell is going on? But it was one of those things where I kind of, A, I learned so much. B, I just seen the fish, seeing them attack it. I was just like, right, that's it. I'm coming back down in 2-3 weeks and I'm having another go and I'm landing one of those bloody things and it's going to happen.
I sense it's become personal with you. You want to get back there at them, don't you?
I get like that, you see.
Yeah, so do I, very much so. I'm with you totally on that. Yeah, I'd want to be back there and going, I'm nailing you.
I can still see it. That night I was going to bed and I could still see the fly. And he was about a 5-pound mullet and he was coming side on and the mouth opens and all I had to do was wait half a second.
All you had to do.
I pulled it out.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the reason that we go back for more. Exactly. It's under my skin now. So, well, I tell you what, let's get back to salmon fishing, fish farming, and more serious issues. Yeah. And let's hear from Elvar Fridriksson now. And I first asked him to give us the background to the Salmon Summit itself.
The reason that we hold the Salmon Summit is that we recognize, through our international networks that there are NGOs and conservationists all over the world trying to accomplish the same goal, fighting the same fight, and having the same problems. So this is a great venue for NGOs and stakeholders or whoever is interested really to get together and create sort of a think tank and see what's out there and how they can help each other. So that's the main reason that we host the Salmon Summit, and this year it was a great success. We had 120 participants. It was held in Reykjavik at the Grand Hotel, and it was a full 2-day conference with everything to do with salmon.
And just to give people, and we will get into a bit more detail about this, but just to give people the idea of some of the kind of discussions, scientific updates, the latest updates on wild salmon, regulatory updates, the updates and regulations around the world affecting wild salmon populations. There was a discussion on wild salmon, open net pen farming in Iceland, another one on alternatives to open net pen salmon farming, the one on high seas buyouts, international regulatory measures, and then river level advocacy. So there was plenty to get through.
Yes.
Maybe we might just start with, take us through what is the situation in Iceland when it comes to salmon farming.
Until very recently, Iceland has been, one of the very few remaining places where the salmon are still abundant. Salmon are still doing good. There's a very small population here, and most of the rivers have been for many, many years now in really good shape. There are, of course, natural ups and downs, but we're starting to see in some rivers now, sharper decline, which is very familiar when you look at the trends in other countries. And at the same time that this is happening, this is part of the reason, but it's also happening at the same time, which causes a lot of concern for the future, is that there is a massive invasion of open net pen salmon farming companies. Now, what they do usually is that they target areas that have been starved for employment for quite some time, with declining populations, and they come in and promise a lot of jobs and so on, and a lot of local politicians are willing to look the other way when it comes to the environmental effects of the industry, because they are promising something, like jobs and money. So this is the third time in Iceland where this industry has tried to start up, right? The first two times way back, that was Icelanders that did not really have the know-how and did not have the immense capital that these companies have. And then about 10 years ago, the legislations in Iceland and the regulations about fish farming are very underdeveloped, and there was no industry. So why would there be a robust regulatory framework? And that's something that the industry can take advantage of. And they were able to create this environment where they could get a hold of licenses, for tens of thousands of tons, without really having to pay for it, and without really doing all that much. And therefore, they create this, immense value in the stock market because they have these licenses, right? So you have this dilemma here where you have a lot of financial power fighting and using a lot of its political clout. And in this third attempt, it worked because it was mainly backed by Norwegian capital that had the know-how and the deep pockets. So all the major salmon farming companies in Iceland are owned by the Norwegian mega companies that own the industry in the rest of the world. And they have now, they're now farming close to 50,000 tons of salmon in Iceland. And this is particularly alarming because, we know that this is the biggest threat to wild salmon. I mean, there's no doubt about that. The scientific community agrees on that. The fact is that they use Norwegian salmon in the farms here. So they're not even using Icelandic salmon. So there's an increased risk for genetic pollution. And just to put it into perspective, even though Iceland's salmon populations are still relatively healthy, it's only about 50, 60,000 individuals in those wild stocks. If you look at the net pens surrounding Iceland today, you have about 21 million farmed Norwegian salmon in our fjords. So the odds are stacked against the wild fish.
I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, come on over. I'm absolutely flummoxed on hearing that.
Yeah,
that is a shocking.
You do not hear this, like sure you don't sound.
No, like you're talking 50 to 60,000 native Icelandic salmon, roughly.
Yeah,
and the discrepancy to 21 million Norwegian farm salmon.
Yeah, it's insane. It's and they plan to double this.
But can I ask you? I have so many questions.
Yeah.
to ask. You said this was the third attempt that they managed to kind of establish. When were they able to do that? Because the reason why I'm asking that is, like, our knowledge and understanding of the damage to wild salmon is not exactly, last year.
Yeah.
So how were they still at the third attempt, still able to push this and get through it? And just before that is, Tom, it's really interesting. We covered west coast of Scotland. And it's very similar what you said, where they targeted local areas, poor local areas, underdeveloped, and targeting each of those little areas is how they kind of get in. And it's amazing. Same tactics then, like you said, being done at Iceland.
They come in as the great savior.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's hard for a municipal politician trying to protect both his or her votes, but also his constituents, to ignore that. And the thing is as well that when they really started to amp up their attempts here, they hired the so the Speaker of the House in Parliament. He left his job in Parliament and went straight to being head lobbyist for the fish farming industry.
Again, I'm sure
and a lot of yeah, I know, and a lot of sort of hires in a similar fashion, right? So you use the capital, and you use the you use the capital to get the political influence, and you sink your claws into these communities that need jobs, that want jobs and want prosperity. You sink your claws into them, and you have the local politicians, and then you have the Speaker of the House in Parliament, which knows, all the key players to accomplish pretty much anything, right?
But how much actual economic benefit are you seeing in the local areas? Because it's Norwegian salmon they're using. More likely, the fish is just being, or it doesn't even land. We were hearing in Scotland a lot of times it doesn't even be, land on shore. Like, what I mean? It's literally processed, shipped out. So, like, what economic advantages are you actually seeing to the Icelandic economy? Like,
so far, I would say, looking at the big picture, all of Iceland's economy, it's fairly little. And the thing is, you have to keep in mind, that the word they really like to use is, export value, right? So they're creating export value, but these are companies that pay billions in dividends, but they've never paid income tax in Iceland, because that's the way the system is set up. You can do that, because you're investing so much and all that, and but I'm not naive. I mean, they have created jobs, and I realize that there is economic value to this. Otherwise, if there was no economic value, there would be no business, right? But with all the knowledge that we have, and we'll get to this later, like you said, with all the alternatives and all the sort of smart way of doing things that are available, this is the cheapest, dirtiest way to farm salmon. And if the system is set up so it incentivizes this kind of operation, then that's what they'll do.
Cheapest is the key word there, isn't it?
Exactly.
I always thought Icelandic people were enlightened. When it comes to, I'm thinking back to kind of, you think maybe environmental policies, or, even think back to kind of with the banking crash in terms of the way, the Icelandic people approached the solution of it. Is there not an outcry, or what's the kind of general consensus in Iceland towards this?
There is actually, and we've been and other NGOs that we work a lot with here. We have been fighting this industry very hard, and a lot of our efforts today go into educating people about what the real story is here, and there's not a lack of content to share, and I think so. What we've done, and this is the benefit of having a small population, right? What we can do fairly easily is we can do nationwide surveys, right? I mean, of course, you're not going to ask everybody in Iceland, but you can get statistically significant samples fairly easily here to get a sense of what the people are thinking. And what we've seen in the last 2 years is that people who are negative or opposed to open net pan aquaculture has gone from about 33% up to 61%. So the majority of the Icelandic population doesn't want this industry.
You wonder then, when will it get to the tipping point for politicians to actually kind of go, oh, we're swimming against the tide here. We better watch our backs.
Yeah. Well, that's where the municipal level and the political clout comes in. If the majority of the country doesn't want this, that's one thing. But then you have the local governments, the municipal governments saying like, hey, this is our area. Like we don't care what the rest of the country thinks. But the thing is that it's not a local problem, right? This could damage the wild salmon stocks of the entire country and ecosystems in the entire country. But I think we're getting much closer to that tipping point. I mean,
you mentioned there, Elvar. Can I just jot in there? You mentioned different areas. Is the aquaculture based in one particular area of Iceland, or is it spread around the whole island?
No, so it's only in the west fjords and in the east fjords of Iceland. So two ends of the country.
And I take it then, not knowing too well, these will be, let's say, the less populated areas with less employment.
Yes, and these are areas where the towns were entirely dependent on commercial fishing. And then when the quota system was privatized, way back then, some of those commercial fishing companies said, oh, you know what, we're going to sell our quota and we're going to move out here, which kind of decimated employment for an entire community, So there, that happened. And then these communities have been left to kind of rebuild very slowly. And then comes the knight in shining armor promising all the jobs.
And am I right in saying they're not in areas of like angling tourism?
I mean, they're not in they're not in the area that have the most angling tourism, but there are wild salmon stocks in most rivers in Iceland, right? And you have genetically unique salmon stocks that are very, very close to open net pan salmon farming right now. We're already starting to see signs of genetic introgression. And the thing is, from our standpoint, whether a river has 2,000 salmon in it or 50 salmon, you have no right to eliminate and make that stock extinct. You have no right to do that.
Just my final question before I want to move on to the alternatives that was discussed. Yep. How much has it percentage-wise has salmon farming increased, say, in the last 10, 15, 20 years in Iceland? Do you have a figure on that?
Well, I'll give you the amount of tons. I don't have the percentage, but it's basically gone from about 3,000 tons up to 45,000 tons in a matter of 6 years.
Oh, what? By 6 years? Yeah. So that's 15-fold.
Like I said before, they were able to secure these licenses, and these things take time. But then when they have the licenses and they have all they need to operate, then put as many salmon in there as you can. That's kind of the attitude. And
that is insane. That's 1,500%.
Yeah, and there's one thing. I think it's good for everybody to keep in mind. There are two kind of huge deciding factors when it comes to salmon farming in Iceland. First one being what is called the carrying capacity, right? So it's basically a model that estimates and calculates how much organic pressure each fjord can take, right? But its scope is limited, right? It's only thinking about that. And then there's a second factor, which is called the genetic risk assessment. And that's another model that says, okay, if we have X much salmon farming, then that has the possibility of X percentage of farmed salmon entering rivers and spawning with wild salmon. And they they cap that at 4%, which I can't understand. Like how do you say that? Like 4% is acceptable? So 1 out of every 20 fish can be farmed? Like, is that okay? And how are you gonna, when a big escape occurs, are you gonna stand by the estuary with a sign, no more farmed allowed? Like, how are you gonna stop this? And that caps the industry at 106,000 tons. So what the industry is trying to do now, they're of course trying to lobby to, vastly increase this, 4 or 5-fold is what they want. But they are capped currently at 106,000 tons.
One of the other discussions you had then was the alternatives. And I think this is fascinating because, we've spoken to Ken Whelan about this, and the world needs aquaculture, whether we like it or not. The demand for it in terms of growing global populations, there's a demand for it. So we need to try and figure out how to do this properly. Yes. Not the way it's being done at the moment. And I was fascinated to find out that you actually had a really interesting discussion on that, and you found that there was companies that are trying to offer a sustainable, environmentally sound way of having farm salmon. So you might just tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are NASF is a salmon conservation NGO, right? So we're looking at this, in terms of what is best for the wild salmon, and it's not our role to be advocates for any kind of industry, but the idea was that there are people in Iceland now that are currently reviewing the regulations on this industry and deciding where we want to go with this in the future. So we thought that this was a great opportunity to show them what's out there, because what the open-ed pen industry says is that that is the best way to farm salmon. They use the word sustainable every chance they get. I mean, that word has kind of lost all meaning, unfortunately. But we were able to get a really interesting group of panelists together, talking about different methods of farming salmon on land in close, completely closed systems. Then we also had a representative from a company that does closed containment in sea, so pens that are closed. And then we had a representative from Canada talking about creating a closed loop in terms of the feed. And the one of the biggest problems with the aquaculture industry is that it needs to source an incredible amount of protein to feed the salmon to make protein for humans, right? So you're taking cheap protein from third world countries, you're turning it into fish meal or fish oil, and then you're feeding it to salmon that is then sold as a luxury product that only a portion of the world can afford. And they say that they're solving the hunger problems of the world, of a growing, overpopulated world, which is not true. Most of the world can't afford salmon. But so what was really interesting in this discussion is that there are people out there who are, they agree with the assumption that the world is not going to just stop eating salmon. There is a demand for it, and it's a growing demand. So they're creating these solutions that have no sort of interaction with the wild counterpart, right? We had 2 Icelandic companies that are starting up land-based farms, and they are using their unique sort of geographical location because they have endless amounts of underground salt water that flows under the lava in the south of Iceland. So you can drill down through the lava, pump that up, and it's a stable temperature. So it's a much better environment for the fish. It's not going down to freezing temperatures and the fish won't eat and all that. It's a stable temperature. It's a closed system, so there's zero chance of a salmon escaping. And there is 0 chance of sea lice, which is another huge problem for the farming industry. We had a company from Canada do a presentation as well. They're using what's called a RAS system, which is a recirculating system. And what was particularly interesting when we were listening to their presentation and another company from Canada is that they're working together to try to use organic waste from the communities in the area to feed to larvae that grow to full size in 10 days, which the salmon love to eat. And then the salmon eat the larvae. The salmon then create organic waste that you can then feed again to the larva,
It's a loop of it.
It's a loop. So you're solving it. So the great thing about it, like I said, it's not our place to tell them what the best industry is or something, but there are a lot of ideas out there, and what these companies are trying to do is that they're trying to do this in a way that does not harm the already fragile salmon stocks.
And are they commercially viable solutions, or are they still just at the kind of R&D stage?
Well, we are at the tipping point in that area. If you follow this industry and this discussion, for many years it's been, this is a pipe dream. They could do this, for a tiny proportion of the production. But now you're starting to see billions and billions of dollars in investment going into this. And people with money don't invest money unless they think they're going to make money, I think this is actually a feasible alternative. It is probably the biggest problem is that it requires a lot of energy.
Yeah, because that's one of the criticisms I've heard about these new technologies. Tell us, just maybe delve into that a little bit.
What you're doing is you're creating a completely controlled environment, and to do that you have to have a lot of power to make sure that everything is running as it should be running 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The counterpart to that is open net pen salmon farming, where it's a floating circle in the ocean with a net hanging from it, and what goes into it goes down through the bottom and into the ocean. So there's no accountability there. Like you don't have to do anything because, the ocean just takes it, and then you're just polluting, right? And I guess like with any factory on land, with any big construction on land, it requires a lot of energy. I'm not a specialist on that, but that is one of the criticism that is very, very valid, because then it becomes part of that discussion. Where are we getting our energy from and how do we utilize it?
A couple of things you hear from the big fish farm companies is cost and technology. Like, are we there yet where, if the will was there, that they could actually just move everything away from the ocean, put them onto land?
I believe so. And I think you, what you said, it was exactly right. If the will is there, it needs to be incentivized. It needs to be, there needs to be a very clear direction that we are moving away from this kind of farming that has done so much damage. So there has to be a clear direction in that from whatever country you're talking about, because this is obviously going to be something that's going to pop up in a lot of countries. They need to incentivize more sustainable solutions, and they need to decide, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. We need to go in another direction. And I still have a lot of faith in the human spirit and the human mind. We can do everything we want if the will is there.
Sometimes they need a stick, though.
Exactly.
Yeah, sometimes you need a stick, and it's. We mentioned something there earlier on about cheap, and cheap goes hand in hand with producing things, and cheap means generally the whole system is run on profit. Let's be honest. The whole system is run on profit. And the incentives to incentivize somebody to make less profit is kind of a hard thing to do, right? So there has to be something really, I would say, forceful, or a big groundswell to make that happen.
Absolutely, and one way to do that is to say, if you're going to farm in open net pens, we're going to make you pay for it because the polluter pays.
Yep.
But if you want to go green, or if you want to do things so it does not harm the wild salmon, we might cut you some slack.
What we've spoken about this before, Elvar, on the show, is, and it's, for me, it's the sheer hypocrisy of it, right, from governments. one hand, they're talking about the environment, sustainability, and especially when it comes to farming on land, right, in terms of emissions and all that kind of stuff. And we've seen from a food quality perspective how much, especially in Ireland, how much emphasis there is from farm to fork, that traceability, high quality, regulations. If there's any kind of disease, any outbreak, it's shut down immediately. Reputation is huge when it comes to farming quality on land.
Yeah.
But yet, we're not seeing any of that when it comes to farmed fish. And I just tear my hair out. Like I've made a conscious decision, and again, Tom, we've spoken about this before. I've made a conscious decision at home with my family, my kids. I'm not going to buy any farmed fish at all, because you see the pictures, you see the crap that gets put into it, but yet you don't see the same campaigning from governments when it comes to that. And I just don't understand. Like, so on one hand, it's like, oh yeah, traceability of beef, farm salmon. Don't worry about it, you'd be grand.
Yeah. If you saw a picture of a beast, a beef cow or beef cattle with open sores, like what you can see on some of the farm salmon, there will be uproar here in Ireland. I know there would be, because as we said, on land, we pride ourselves on high quality land-based food. But you put those pictures up of salmon with open sores and no skin and whatnot, and people don't seem to get too perturbed about it.
I think unfortunately, salmon and just fish in general, they people do not connect with them in the same way as they do with cows, for example. Unless they're anglers, then they connect very deeply with them. But then also, what is a key element here is that this is under the surface, right? So if you're driving in Scotland or Norway or Iceland or something, you just see a circle in the ocean. What's so terrible about that? You don't see what's happening down there unless you see it on photos or videos like you mentioned. But then when you start talking to people about this, they realize the hypocrisy of this. Because the salmon farming industry, it's standard. It's standard that that about 25% of the fish die in the production process, before they reach a size ready for harvest. And if you put that in perspective with just, let's keep talking about cattle, there's a farmer and 1 out of every 4 cows just dies because it has horrible open wounds and all that, like you can imagine what would happen. Like they would be closed down immediately.
I just don't get it. I really don't, but from a governmental perspective as well. And and in fairness, in Ireland, the only thing that gets the Irish government when it comes to this stuff is reputation, international reputation. Because if suddenly Irish beef, something happens, and if access to international markets closes, they're on top of like nothing else. Yeah. And again, it comes back to that word will.
Yes.
And money. Two words.
Yeah, 2 words. Yeah. Hand in hand.
And it just seems like they're getting a free ride at the moment.
They are, and they have been for a long time.
It seems to be like we need more education, I think, going forward about this. And look, it's good to see that there's alternatives out there that hopefully we can see once more pressure is put on the industry to put them there. I said it before, Tom, as well, as in the same way the EU is banning the diesel engines, petrol engines in 2030. If the EU decided next year to say, by the way, in 2030 we're banning all open net, sea farming, open pen farms. If they decided to do it, that'd be it.
Yeah.
The alternative would be found. Like
the alternative would be found, and it would be found quick, because people are very good at finding ways to make money.
Hey, money's cropped up again.
Exactly. oh, we just have to stop doing this and do this instead to make money. Yeah, fine. Let's do that.
Okay, yeah. Okay, fair enough. Yeah. No problem. I'll do that. Well, that's, yeah, exactly. It's amazing how it works. Elvar, tell us, how did you get involved with the NASF? Just tell us a bit about your own background and involvement.
Ori Vigfusson, who was the founder of NASF, I knew him a little bit through my father when I was a kid. My father was involved in some of the work that he was doing, and so I followed it pretty closely. And then when I was old enough to guide on some of the salmon rivers here in Iceland, it was Ori who first gave me a shot there, and we became close friends. And then when I was making my way through life, studying psychology at the university, I was doing statistical analysis for NASF, and then it just kind of had a snowball effect, and I started doing a lot more work with Ori. Then, of course, he sadly passed away in 2017, and there was a bit of a gap in all of this. He was a very unique. He was a bit of a one-man army. And it was up to a handful of people that had known him well and worked with him to kind of pick up the pieces and map this out. How do we continue? And that's what we did. And I'm very happy to say that now, almost 6 years after his passing, we're getting really strong again. We have NASF chapters in various different countries that are all of them active. We're fighting fish farming. We're buying up unsustainable fisheries. We're assisting groups with restoring habitat. All these main emphases of the NASF are in full effect. And I've been working full time for the fund for almost 3 years now.
It was obviously a vacuum after Ori's death, and I think it's probably, for such characters, you can't expect somebody to just become Ori version 2.
Yeah.
He was one of a kind. So maybe in the sense of, you just have to fill that vacuum in other ways, through collective kind of work, maybe, I think.
Absolutely. And that I heard that so many times after he passed away. Oh, so are you the new Ori, or who is the new Ori? And there will never be another Ori. I mean, he was a force of nature, and he was doing very unique salmon conservation work when there was none, really. So, am I or somebody else the new Ori? No, not at all. But we are doing everything that we can to make sure that the emphasis and the goals of NASF stay the same. And it's not just different people, it's just a different world as well. When Ori passed away, there was hardly a fish farming industry in Iceland. So everything around us has changed so much as well.
Elvar, so you used to guide.
Yeah.
You don't guide anymore now.
I just don't have the time anymore.
Too busy fighting the fish farm.
Yeah, exactly.
Fighting the fight. Well, fair play to you for fighting the fight. And when you guided, was it salmon?
Yeah, mostly. A little bit of trout, but mostly salmon.
Yeah. And do you miss it?
I do. Yeah.
Because I'm a guide. That's why I'm asking you.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah.
Tom, do you miss it? I don't. You're usually tearing your hair out at the end of the season, like.
Well, that's routine,
Yeah.
And then about
the end of the
2
season,
days later,
at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. End of the day.
Clients.
Yeah. At end of the season, you're like, oh no, this was the last season. I'm done. And then about
never
about 2
again.
days later, you're like, oh, I want to go fishing. I want to dive.
Yeah. Worldwide. Oh God. So actually, well, that's great, because on this show we always ask one question. So this is away from the NASF now.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we've told you this. So if I put you on the spot, I'm sorry. But you're going to have to answer it anyway.
Okay.
We ask everybody we have on the show what their most memorable fish on the fly was.
I have an answer for that.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. All right. So I was fishing the big Laxá up north in Iceland, which is known as the sort of the river with the biggest salmon in Iceland. And I have fished it so many times and have not caught a thing. But then every now and then you have these really phenomenal days. And this was about a year after my daughter was born. And I love tying flies. So I tied this little size 12 double that I thought, if I catch a salmon on this, I'll name it after my daughter. And then I was fishing a pool called Holmavastipla, easy name. And I'm fishing a size 10 Colburn special. And this massive fish kind of rolls on the fly. And next cast, he does it again, but never touches it, right? And I tried a few more casts. And then I thought, you know what? I'll put on the new fly. And first cast, he nailed the fly. I mean, absolutely hammered it. And I don't know why, but normally you fish that river with a 14-foot 8-weight or something like that. But I was trying out my new 9.5-foot 7-weight that day.
Oh no!
Yeah, oh no! Right. And this fish just went across the entire river. It's a huge river, and he was jumping on the other bank, and I was way in the backing. I couldn't do anything. And then down towards the tail of the pool, there's an island which splits the river in two. And he tried a couple of times to go down the other channel, and there's no way to chase it, and I just really pushed him as much as I could, and he always came back. But then he went down the channel on my side. So I had to run about 500 yards downriver, as fast as I could. And then about, I don't know, probably 25 minutes later or so, I got him into this little cove and was able to land the fish. And that was my biggest salmon. It was 103 centimeters, which is, I don't know, 6 pounds.
Yeah. Nice.
And on that small double and on the 7. So that was a memorable fish.
And so what's the name of the fly now?
Harpa, which that's my daughter's name, and that means harp, like the instrument.
Yeah. The Irish, the national instrument of Ireland.
Yeah, exactly. That was the other reason.
God, happy ending all around.
Yeah.
Well, Elvar Fridriksson, NASF's program director in Iceland. Thank you very much for joining. Some really interesting insights. I think people are going to get a lot from that. Didn't realize what it was really like in Iceland in terms of the fish farming industry, but also hopefully there's some silver shoots there, or some hope for the future in terms of alternatives that are being developed, and will and money. It's the kind of two things I think I've taken out of this conversation, that if we can be pushing people in one direction for the right reasons, hopefully, fingers crossed, we might find a sustainable solution. But Elvar, thanks again for joining us on the show.
Great, Elvar. It was really good having you on, and some fascinating stuff there. Thanks a million.
Thank you so much.
Our thanks to Elvar Fridriksson for joining us on the show. And don't forget to rate, review, and follow the Ireland on the Fly podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Plus, you can keep up to date on IrelandOnTheFly.com, as well as on Instagram, and myself and Tom will be back with another episode about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland.